In a humble village in northern Italy, a child once whispered her dreams to God through little paper boats that floated toward the horizon. She longed to bring Christ to faraway souls, never imagining that God would send her not to the east but to the west, across the seas to America. There, she would heal the forgotten, comfort the poor, and become the first American saint, Saint Frances Xavier Cabrini, the missionary of the Sacred Heart. The wind swept over the Lombard plains, carrying the scent of wildflowers and damp earth toward a small farmhouse near Sant'Angelo Lodigiano. There, on July 15, 1850, a tiny, frail girl was born, the youngest of 13 children in the Cabrini family. Her parents, Agostino and Stella, were devout Catholics, hardworking farmers whose faith colored every moment of their lives. The child was so small and delicate that the midwife whispered she might not survive the night. Yet the Cabrinis baptized her immediately, naming her Francesca Xavier, in honor of Saint Frances Xavier, the great Jesuit missionary who had carried the gospel to the ends of the earth. It seemed a prophetic choice. From her earliest years, Frances's world was shaped by faith and imagination. She would sit by the brook behind the family house, floating little paper boats she made with her sister Rosa. On each boat, she placed a tiny violet petal and called it a missionary, sending it off down the stream to faraway lands. "Go," she whispered once, "bring Jesus to the world." Her sister laughed, but Frances's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Even then, the sense of divine calling pulsed quietly within her, a flame in a fragile body. Her father, Agostino, worked hard in the fields but would pause every evening to read aloud from the lives of the saints. Frances listened wide-eyed to tales of missionaries who crossed oceans and faced storms and persecution for Christ. Saint Frances Xavier became her secret hero. "If only I could go where he went," she thought, clutching her rosary. Yet when she tried to climb trees or run with the boys, her weak lungs betrayed her. She would often cough until she grew pale and dizzy, and her mother would carry her back inside. "You are not meant for the fields," her mother said kindly. "God will find another way for you to serve him." Frances's health kept her close to home, but her soul traveled far. She began to make tiny crosses out of reeds and place them along the path that led to the village church, a silent offering of love. Her prayer life deepened early. Before dawn she would kneel beside her bed, whispering the Angelus, her breath clouding in the chill air. Even as a child, she showed an intensity of devotion that astonished her family. She fasted in Lent with zeal far beyond her years and spoke often of wanting to be a bride of Christ, who would bring his name to souls who had never heard it. At 13, she entered a boarding school run by the Daughters of the Sacred Heart. There, the seeds of her vocation took root. The sisters noticed her intelligence, discipline, and strong will hidden beneath her gentle manner. She excelled in languages and literature, though she was especially drawn to geography. Maps fascinated her, the blue sweep of oceans, the strange shapes of distant continents. She often traced the coasts of China and India with her finger, murmuring, "Someday I will go there." Her teachers smiled indulgently. She was, after all, a sickly Italian girl from a farming village, with no wealth or prospects. But Frances spoke with such conviction that some began to wonder whether God truly had something extraordinary planned for her. One evening, after a mission talk by a visiting priest describing the spiritual needs of China, Frances stayed behind in the chapel. The golden light of the sanctuary lamp flickered across her face. She felt a stirring in her heart that she could not name, something vast, both terrifying and beautiful. In prayer, she later recounted, she seemed to see a vision, a sea without end, filled with ships carrying missionaries to foreign shores, and among them, one small boat bearing a nun dressed in white. "It was I," she later said simply. "And I knew then that God was calling me." After finishing her education, she longed to enter the Daughters of the Sacred Heart, but her fragile health betrayed her again. The superior, though kind, refused her admission. "You are too delicate, my child," she said gently. "You would not survive the hardships of the missions." Frances left in tears, but not in despair. "If God wants me," she said to herself, "He will open another door." That sentence became the rule of her life. She returned home and devoted herself to teaching in a small village school. Her gentleness with children and her ability to instill both learning and piety soon drew attention. Yet even amid this humble work, her missionary longing burned brighter. When a cholera epidemic swept through the region, Frances volunteered to help the sick, risking her life daily. She prayed with the dying, tended to orphans, and carried food to quarantined families. Her courage astonished the local priests, who began to see in her not a frail girl, but a woman of fierce spiritual strength. "This one," said one priest, "is made of iron." In 1874, she met Father Antonio Serrati, a parish priest who directed a struggling orphanage known as the House of Providence in Codogno. Seeing her zeal, he invited her to help revive the institution. Frances accepted eagerly, though what she found there nearly broke her heart. The orphanage was in ruins, walls cracked, the children half-starved, the sisters discouraged. The woman who directed it, a certain Teresa Grassi, was well-intentioned but disorganized. Frances, still in her 20s, took charge with calm authority. She reorganized the kitchen, disciplined the staff, and taught the children not only their prayers but also practical skills. Within a year, the house began to flourish again. People came to call her the Little Mother, and her reputation for holiness spread quietly through the region. Yet trouble brewed beneath the surface. Some of the older sisters resented her firmness and youth. They whispered that she was too ambitious, too strict, even prideful. When Father Serrati died suddenly, the orphanage fell into conflict. Teresa Grassi, threatened by Frances's influence, tried to expel her. Frances was heartbroken. After all her labor and prayer, she was told once again that there was no place for her in the religious life. "They send me away," she wrote in her journal, "but perhaps God is sending me somewhere else." That somewhere else soon became clear. In 1880, the Bishop of Lodi, Monsignor Domenico Gelmini, having observed her leadership and sanctity, asked her to found a new religious community dedicated to missionary service. Frances hesitated only a moment. She still dreamed of China, but she took the bishop's hand and said, "I am ready." Thus began the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a congregation born from her suffering. With 7 young women at her side, she took her vows in a small chapel and received the name Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini after her beloved missionary saint. The early days were marked by poverty and struggle. The sisters had no money and survived on donations of bread and vegetables. But Mother Cabrini's trust in Providence was unshakable. When one sister fretted over their lack of funds, she smiled and said, "If we have faith, God will send what we need. He never lets his work die." Miraculously, benefactors appeared just in time, and the little community grew. They opened schools, orphanages, and hospitals, spreading devotion to the Sacred Heart wherever they went. Mother Cabrini worked tirelessly, teaching, writing letters, and personally overseeing every detail, from sewing habits to writing constitutions for the new order. Her mystical life deepened during these years. She spent long hours before the Blessed Sacrament, sometimes motionless for so long that the sisters believed she had fallen into ecstasy. Once, a sister who entered the chapel late at night found her kneeling there, tears glistening on her cheeks. When asked what she saw, Mother Cabrini simply said, "I saw his heart, so wounded, so burning with love for souls, and I could only say, 'Send me, Lord, send me.'" Anywhere. That night, she renewed her vow to go to the missions, believing still that one day she would cross the seas to the east. And so she prayed, prepared, and waited for God's next command. It would come, but not in the direction she expected. The chapel at Cadonio glowed dimly in the evening candlelight when Mother Cabrini knelt before the tabernacle, her hands clasped tightly. For years she had dreamed of sailing to China like her patron saint. Now her little congregation had grown. Her sisters taught in schools, tended orphans, and ministered to the poor across Lombardy. Surely, she thought, the time had come to take the gospel to the East. She had written letters to bishops, missionaries, and even to the Vatican, seeking approval for her distant dream. But God, as ever, had his own plans. One afternoon in 1887, she received a letter that would change everything. It came from Archbishop Giovanni Battista Scalabrini of Piacenza, a man who carried the weight of an immense pastoral sorrow. In recent years, thousands of Italian immigrants, poor, desperate, and often illiterate, had fled to America seeking work. They found instead prejudice, exploitation, and spiritual abandonment. Many lost their faith, cut off from priests and sacraments. The Archbishop, moved by their plight, had been seeking religious sisters to serve them. "Mother Cabrini," he wrote, "your missionary heart is needed not in the East, but in the West." The letter pierced her heart like a sudden light. America? It was the opposite direction from all she had planned. For days she prayed in silence before the Blessed Sacrament, asking God for clarity. Finally, she decided to bring the matter to Pope Leo XIII himself. She and her companions journeyed to Rome, where she was granted an audience with the aging pontiff. Kneeling before him, she explained her dream of going to China, her congregation's readiness, and her love for the missionary calling. The Pope listened quietly, his deep eyes resting on her small, determined face. Then, with a gentle smile, he said words that would echo through her life. "Not to the East, my daughter, but to the West. Go to America. There you will find your China." The words struck her like divine command. Rising from her knees, she bowed deeply. "Yes, Holy Father," she said simply. "I will go wherever God wills." A few months later, in March of 1889, Mother Cabrini stood on the deck of the ship La Bourgogne, bound for New York with 6 of her sisters. The sea was rough, and many passengers grew sick, but she moved calmly among them, comforting frightened mothers and praying with children. "If we die," she told her sisters, "we will die as missionaries." The voyage lasted nearly 2 weeks. Each morning she celebrated the day with prayers and hymns, and each evening she watched the sunset bleed into the Atlantic, whispering, "O Sacred Heart, open America to your love." When at last they reached New York Harbor, the sisters were stunned by the sight before them: the jagged skyline, the bustling docks, the foreign shouts of dockworkers. But instead of the warm welcome they expected, they found confusion and disappointment. The local Archbishop, Michael Corrigan, had not been properly informed of their coming. When he met them, he frowned. "I have no place for you here," he said bluntly. "The schools are full, and your Italian immigrants are too poor to support you." The sisters looked to Mother Cabrini. For a moment, her face paled, but her eyes remained steady. "Excellency," she said gently, "the Holy Father sent us here, and we have come to stay." That night, they took refuge in a cold, crowded tenement in Little Italy. The room was damp, their trunks barely dry from the voyage, but Mother Cabrini knelt before a small crucifix and prayed aloud. "Lord Jesus, if this is your will, you will show us the way. You never send without providing." Within days, Providence answered. A local priest sympathetic to the Italian immigrants offered them temporary lodging in his parish house. From there, Mother Cabrini began walking the streets of New York, speaking with the immigrant mothers and children, hearing their stories of hardship and loneliness. She saw men sleeping under bridges after losing their jobs, women struggling to feed families, and children growing up without faith. Her heart broke, but her resolve only strengthened. With her fluent Italian and careful charm, She visited the city's wealthy benefactors and Catholic institutions, seeking donations. "I am here for the children," she would say. "If you give me bricks, I will build schools. If you give me hearts, I will build souls." Her persistence wore down even the most reluctant supporters. In a matter of months, she founded her first orphanage, the Sacred Heart Orphan Asylum, in a modest house on East 59th Street. It opened with only a few beds and even fewer supplies, but the sisters worked miracles of charity there. They taught reading, writing, and catechism, sewed clothing, and cared for the sick. Mother Cabrini often said, "We must be angels of consolation to those who suffer." But the trials were constant. The sisters faced language barriers, exhaustion, and poverty. At times, food ran so low that they divided a single loaf of bread among them. One night, after discovering that the pantry was empty, Mother Cabrini told her sisters to set the table anyway. "Our Lord will provide," she said serenely. They began their meal prayer, and moments later, there was a knock on the door. A local baker stood there with a cart of unsold bread, saying, "I had a feeling someone might need this tonight." The sisters wept with joy. Mother Cabrini smiled and said, "You see, the heart of Jesus does not forget his brides." Word of her work spread quickly. Requests began to arrive from other cities, New Orleans, Chicago, Denver, each asking for sisters to care for the growing Italian populations. Mother Cabrini, though exhausted, never refused. "We are missionaries of the Sacred Heart," she reminded her community. "We must have the heart of a missionary and the feet of a pilgrim." Her leadership astonished all who met her. Despite her small stature and soft voice, she possessed an indomitable spirit. She handled business with bankers, negotiated with city officials, and corresponded with bishops and the Vatican, all while maintaining a deep interior life of prayer. Her faith was both practical and mystical. Practical in her ability to manage institutions, mystical in her constant awareness of God's presence. Once, during a voyage to Panama to inspect one of her orphanages, a violent storm struck the ship. The crew feared they would sink. The sisters clung to one another in terror as waves crashed over the deck. Mother Cabrini, calm amid the chaos, took her rosary and began to pray aloud. "O Sacred Heart of Jesus, you are the King of the seas. Command the winds to be still." Witnesses later swore that within minutes, the winds softened and the storm abated. The captain, who had been cursing moments before, fell to his knees. "Mother," he said, "your prayers have saved us." Another time, while traveling to New Orleans, she fell ill and collapsed upon arrival. The doctors urged her to rest, but she refused. "There are children waiting," she said. When she rose from her sickbed to bless a dying girl, the child unexpectedly opened her eyes, smiled, and whispered, "The beautiful lady has come." The mother insisted that the girl had been unconscious for hours. Mother Cabrini quietly blessed the child again and returned to her room to pray. The girl survived. Over the next decade, her congregation expanded across the United States. She founded schools, hospitals, and orphanages, often in the poorest districts. In New Orleans, she opened a hospital that treated Black and Italian patients side by side, an act of charity that scandalized some and inspired others. "Charity knows no color," she said firmly. "The heart of Jesus beats for all." Her mystical devotion to the Sacred Heart remained her guiding force. Every morning before dawn, she could be found in the chapel, kneeling motionless in prayer. The sisters often heard her whisper, "My Jesus, I love you so much and I am yours." One night, she confided to a trusted sister that she had seen Christ in a vision, standing on a shore filled with light. "He told me," she said softly, "that there are still more seas to cross." In the years that followed, she crossed them indeed, again and again. She sailed to Central and South America, and even back to Italy to recruit more sisters. The seas that had terrified her as a child now became her home. On one voyage, A passenger remarked that she must be weary of so many travels. She smiled and said, "When one travels for love, the miles do not count." By 1900, she had founded over 50 institutions across 2 continents. She became an American citizen in 1909, proudly calling herself an Italian by birth, but an American by choice. Yet despite her fame and recognition, she remained humble and hidden in spirit. "I am only the instrument," she would say. "It is God who plays the melody." Through all her triumphs, she still longed for heaven. Her health, always delicate, began to weaken under the strain of constant travel. But her heart, her indomitable missionary heart, never faltered. Wherever she went, she repeated her lifelong prayer, "Sacred Heart of Jesus, be my light, my guide, and my love." She had crossed oceans, faced storms, and built an empire of charity, but her greatest journey, the final one, was still ahead. By the dawn of the 20th century, Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini had become a legend across 2 continents. To the immigrants in New York, she was La Santa Madre, the Holy Mother who built homes for their orphans and schools for their children. To her sisters, she was a general in the Army of the Sacred Heart, unyielding, practical, and utterly given to God. Yet within her frail body, the same childlike humility remained. She never sought recognition, and when newspapers called her the most remarkable woman in America, she only laughed softly and said, "If they knew how poor and weak I am, they would not say so." Her energy seemed almost supernatural. Though she was often ill, she traveled constantly, overseeing her institutions with unrelenting precision. She visited hospitals to check the cleanliness of the sheets, tasted the children's soup to make sure it was good, and gently corrected sisters who grew discouraged. Her letters, thousands of them, were filled with encouragement and trust. "Courage, my dear daughters," she wrote once from Denver. "Even when the road is steep, we walk with Christ, and He does not lead astray." But her heart was not only managerial, it was mystical. The Sacred Heart of Jesus was the axis of her life. In moments of silence, she often entered a kind of spiritual rapture that left witnesses awed. One sister recalled finding her kneeling before the tabernacle, tears falling silently as though she were speaking with an unseen friend. When asked later what she had felt, Mother Cabrini replied simply, "He was so close, closer than breath." And he said, "Do not be afraid. Your work is my work." That intimacy with Christ sustained her through immense trials. In 1901, she undertook the foundation of Columbus Hospital in Chicago, a bold venture that would serve immigrants who were turned away from other hospitals. Money was scarce, and the land itself seemed cursed with obstacles. Permits were delayed, investors withdrew, and the sisters faced exhaustion. But Mother Cabrini never wavered. One winter day, when the construction nearly halted for lack of funds, she gathered her sisters in the half-built chapel, snow drifting through the open roof. She placed a small statue of the Sacred Heart on a wooden crate and said, "Let us consecrate this house to Him. If He wants it, it will rise." Within a week, a generous donor appeared, pledging the exact sum they needed to finish the work. "He never fails," she told her sisters. Never. The hospital soon became one of the finest in the city, open to all regardless of race or creed. At its dedication, she stood quietly in the back, rosary in hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. "May every bed here," she whispered, "be a pulpit of love." Her missions expanded even farther. Colorado, Washington, California, Nicaragua, Argentina, Brazil. Each foundation began the same way, with prayer, poverty, and miracles. She crossed the Andes by mule to visit remote communities, slept in rough quarters on ships, and comforted the dying in hospitals where the stench of sickness hung thick in the air. Her sisters sometimes begged her to rest. "Mother, you are not made of iron," one pleaded. She smiled and tapped her heart. "No," she said, but his heart lends me strength. Still, her health was breaking. The years of travel, poor diet, and relentless labor had taken their toll. She suffered from recurring fevers, headaches, and exhaustion. Yet she kept moving, driven by an invisible flame. "I will rest in heaven," she often said. In 1907, she returned to Italy to attend a gathering of her sisters. There, surrounded by the young women she had formed, she gave a final exhortation that seemed almost prophetic. "My daughters," she said, "never lose heart. The world will call you dreamers, but remember, the heart of Jesus was also pierced for love. If we suffer for him, we are close to him." Those who were present would never forget the radiance in her face as she spoke, as though she were already half in heaven. Back in America, she focused on her last great labor, expanding her hospitals and schools to the western states. In 1909, she became a naturalized U.S. citizen, proudly signing her name in the register. She held up the small paper afterward and said, "Now I am one of you. America has given me much. I must give her souls in return." That same year, while traveling through California, she visited the coastal town of Burbank to open a school for poor children. The sisters who accompanied her recalled her delight in the orange groves and her wonder at the Pacific Ocean. Standing at the shore, she gazed at the horizon with tears in her eyes. "I have crossed so many seas," she murmured, "but this one feels like the end of the world. And yet, beyond it, heaven." Her spirituality had grown deeper, simpler, more luminous. She saw God's hand in everything: the rising sun, the laughter of children, the bread shared at the table. Her letters from this period are full of tender gratitude. "Ah, if only souls would see," she wrote, "that love is everything. We can travel oceans and build hospitals, but without love, all is nothing. Love alone lasts." Yet beneath the peace, her body was failing. Her heart, so full of zeal for the Sacred Heart, was literally growing weak. She began to suffer fainting spells and shortness of breath. Her sisters begged her to slow down, but she would only smile and say, "When God calls, he will find me working." In the autumn of 1917, she traveled to Chicago once more to rest at the Columbus Hospital she had founded. There, she continued writing letters and planning expansions even from her bedside. One morning, she asked a sister to bring her a small notebook. "I wish to count the graces God has given me," she said. She began listing them: her family, her vocation, her sisters, her faith, her crosses. When she finished, she closed the notebook and whispered, "He has given me everything." A few weeks later, she journeyed to Chicago's West Park Hospital, where she had a small room near the chapel. Despite her weakness, she continued visiting patients, distributing candy to children, and praying with the sick. Witnesses remembered her soft voice as she bent over hospital beds, whispering, "Have courage. The heart of Jesus watches over you." It was there, in early December 1917, that her earthly journey approached its end. On December 22nd, she was found in the kitchen helping to stuff candy for the children's Christmas celebration. "They must have a happy feast," she said, smiling. A few hours later, she felt faint and went to her room to rest. The sisters noticed her lips moving in prayer. One of them, Sister Xavier, knelt beside her. "Mother, are you suffering?" she asked. Mother Cabrini opened her eyes, radiant and calm. "No, my child," she said softly. "I am going home." Moments later, she placed her hand over her heart and murmured, "Jesus, I love you." Then, with a sigh as gentle as the turning of a page, she entered the peace she had long awaited. The sisters wept, but the room seemed filled with light. Even the doctor who came to confirm her passing said quietly, "It is as if she fell asleep in the Lord." The news spread quickly through Chicago. Immigrants who had once called her mother crowded the streets, carrying candles and rosaries. In every chapel she had built, the same words were whispered, She is gone to the heart she loved. Her funeral was simple, just as she had desired. No grand eulogies, only prayers and hymns of gratitude. But her legacy was immense. By the time of her death, she had founded 67 institutions, schools, hospitals, orphanages, and convents across North and South America and Europe. Her sisters continued her work with the same quiet zeal, and her name became synonymous with courage, compassion, and faith. Years later, miracles began to be reported through her intercession: healings of the sick, conversions of the lost, help for travelers at sea. Those who prayed to her spoke of a warmth in their hearts, as though the same sacred heart that had guided her still beat within her spiritual children. In 1946, Pope Pius XII declared her a saint, the first American citizen ever canonized. But in truth, her sanctity had already been known in the tenements and hospitals where she had walked. Her feast day, November 13th, became a day of joy for immigrants, for the poor, and for all who strive to love without boundaries. Even now, in quiet chapels from New York to Buenos Aires, her image stands serene, a small woman in a dark habit, holding a globe close to her chest. Her eyes seem fixed on distant shores, still searching for souls to bring home. Beneath her statue are often carved her own words, the compass of her entire life. The heart of Jesus, my refuge, my strength, my all.